All right. Good day and welcome to the the Universal Postal Union's open forum on Connect.Post, digitally connecting through the postal network. Today we have a wonderful lineup of speakers. Um, on my left is Mr. Nigel Casimir, Deputy Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. Right, two chairs away or one chair away. And there's digital inclusion expert from the Universal Postal Union. Directly across from me to my right is Mr. Dan York, Senior Advisor at the Internet Society. And let me get Yuping's actual new title. We have Yuping from the UNDP, and her title is Engagement at the Executive Office of the UNDP. Online, we have Miss Carrie Ann Barrett. I can't see online yet, so I hope I can see the Zoom room soon. Carrie Ann Barrett, Chief of Cybersecurity at the Organization of American States. Is Carrie Ann online? Carrie Ann, if you're there, can you just pop in and say hi? And as well, we have Mr. Rodney Taylor, the Secretary General. We can see physically, well, see virtually at, yes. And Carrie Ann says hello. And Rodney, welcome. We'll be seeing you. And he is the Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union of the based in Trinidad and Tobago from the Caribbean. And we hope to hear some good stuff from Rodney today as we proceed with our open forum. So I'm going to not talk too much. Without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over to Mr. Hernandez from the UPU, who will introduce the session to us and give us a quick presentation on the topic at hand. Kevin, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry about that. So hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Hernandez, and I am a digital inclusion expert at the UPU and the focal point for the CONNECT.POST project. So if you have any questions about the project, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. So CONNECT.POST is a project led by the Universal Postal Union, which aims to maximize the sustainable development contributions of the postal sector and to help foster more inclusive and sustainable digital transformations that leave no one behind. And among those contributions are bridging the digital divide and promoting social, economic, and digital inclusion. So very briefly, I think it's important to make a clarification about what we mean when we say bridging the digital divide and promoting digital inclusion. Because although these concepts are often used interchangeably, in reality, they actually mean two different things. So when we mention bridging the digital divide, we are talking about gaps in digital access. On the other hand, when we speak about digital inclusion, we are referring to people's abilities to fully participate in societies as they undergo a process of digitalization. And the important thing to note about these two concepts is that the digital divide can contribute to digital exclusion, but does not automatically cause it. Instead, digital exclusion occurs when there is a digital divide present and opportunities and services can only be accessed digitally. In those situations, those without access or who lack digital skills end up being left out and are put at risk of being falling behind. And we believe that a connected global postal infrastructure Sorry, I'm having issues with the clicker. Next slide, please, if you can control it. Okay. So connecting a post office can contribute to bridging the digital divide. If we connect post offices in rural areas, we can then leverage that connectivity to provide access to the communities surrounding it. And there are different ways of doing this. For example, you can offer public access to digital equipment or provide access to the internet at post offices, such as Zimpost and Zimbabwe is doing, and that's the picture in this slide. They have connected over 200 post offices and then turned them into community information centers. Or post offices can even host a community network, meaning that post offices can become an internet service provider for their surrounding communities. Now moving on to digital inclusion. So as I mentioned earlier, the digital divide does not automatically lead to digital exclusion. Instead, it's a combination of the digital divide and when opportunities and services are only accessible through digital channels that leads to digital exclusion. And unfortunately, this trend has become widespread across the world. For example, the 2023 UN World Public Sector Report found that too many countries and service providers were taking a digital-only approach, which was then resulting in the digital exclusion of marginalized groups. And this has led many governments to rethink this strategy. And they stressed, the report stressed that, quote, a just and inclusive digital transformation that leaves no one behind includes hybrid models of service delivery, including blended or multi-channel service delivery. And some governments try to provide multi-channel service delivery by setting up in-person one-stop shops. We went too far. Okay. So some governments try to provide multi-channel service delivery by setting up in-person one-stop shops or service centers, where people and businesses can access a wide range of digitally enabled services from a single location. Unfortunately, as an FAO report released earlier this year found, service centers are often few in number, and they tend to be concentrated in urban and densely populated areas. So then this means that they are not easily accessible for people in rural areas who end up continuing to be at risk of exclusion and being left behind even when service centers are introduced. Next slide, please. Okay, there we go. Meanwhile, the global postal network infrastructure is the most extensive and expansive retail service network in the world. There are over 650,000 post offices globally, and the majority of them are located in rural areas. So this gives posts an unprecedented reach in digitally underserved areas and means that post offices tend to have a service outlet presence in places where other service providers and government actors struggle to reach. Why did that? Sorry. For this reason, post offices are very well placed to enable a more inclusive multi-channel service delivery. I don't know what's happening with the clicker, sorry. Okay, there we go. Next one. Anyway, I'll continue without the next slide, please. Next one. Next one. There we go. So for this reason, post offices are very well placed to enable a more inclusive multi-channel service delivery. And this is not just a concept, but something that is already happening in several countries. So the graphic on the slide is from Poste Italiane, who have connected 7,000 post offices in rural areas to high-speed internet, and then leverage that connectivity to transform their post offices into one-stop shops for digital government services. And this allows their rural residents to access digital government services across multiple channels, including the post office counter, through electronic kiosks, through advanced ATMs, through a call center, and through the web. And this makes these services more easily accessible to people in rural areas where the post office is often the only public institution with a presence in those areas. And this is the kind of use of the postal infrastructure which we want to promote at CONNECT.POST. So in summary, the goal of CONNECT.POST is to connect all post offices in the world to the internet by 2030. And we have created a workflow to get there, and I don't really have the time to get into that. But a key point to highlight for all you is that making this vision a reality requires collaboration with governments, international organizations, donors, the private sector, civil society, and of course, designated postal operators. And we are currently working on building a coalition of actors to make this vision a reality. And we are very keen on building and exploring partnerships so that together we can help maximize the potential of the postal network to facilitate more inclusive digital transformations and to help bridge the digital divide and to promote economic, social, and digital inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for that brief but very enlightening introduction on CONNECT.POST. And I hope everybody got a sense of what those are and how we are to move forward with this project, which really is ambitious in its scope, trying to ensure that the postal community, the post offices, and the stakeholders involved are connected via this network. The approach I take today is sort of a talk show format. Going to ask questions of our experts who are here with us today, including our Kevin Hernandez, who may be asked to answer some questions. And I'm going to start with the CTU, the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, because I'm Caribbean, so I'm taking moderator's privilege and putting them first. So probably could start, and let's give the hybrid model a good try. So let's start with the online participants. So we'll have Rodney say a few words as to what's happening, but I think Nigel will give an introduction of the CTU's overarching thinking. But Rodney, maybe given you're the SG, just say a few words about what what's happening. Just
Sure. Good morning, or afternoon, good evening, everyone. And thanks for including us in this very important discussion. It's good to be able to join you online. We have been, since 2023, we've signed an MOU, the CTU that is, we are a regional intergovernmental organization based in Trinidad and Tobago, serving 20 member states. Most of them are independent territories or independent countries, but some are British overseas territories and Dutch overseas territories as well. And we have been advocating for that bridge between the Postal Service and the Ministries of Digital Transformation. In some cases, the same ministers or same policymakers have responsibility for postal services, which of course is a form of communication, and information technology or communication or digital transformation. And so for us, the link is very clear for the reasons outlined in the presentation, because the Postal Service can allow or facilitate the closure of the digital divide and ensure that there is no, or at least the risk for digital exclusion are minimized. So in practical terms, we signed an MOU in 2023 with the UPU, and that was intended to promote assessments of our postal services in the region, how ready they were for e-commerce, how connected they were under the CONNECT.POST initiative. The drive is to, of course, ensure that they have good and robust connectivity that they can then in turn service their communities. In addition to that, my own experience working with the government of Barbados was that we partnered in particular during COVID to allow the delivery of a driver's license, so that we were able to stand up online renewal of driver's licenses, and they were able to, even though the offices were closed physically, the Postal Service stepped in to allow for a seamless online renewal and delivery of those driver's licenses. That then evolved to passports, and there are other services now where physical credentials are needed, so it allows for seamless end-to-end e-commerce. So I'll stop there for now. I know there are many other speakers, but for us, it is to ensure that policymakers get it. They understand that the Postal Service is more than the delivery of letters, and that is a very integral part of our digital transformation in efforts, especially if we want to be inclusive. Thank you.
thank you very much, SG Rodney Taylor. So I'll hand now to your colleague, Deputy Secretary General Nigel Casimir, who will elaborate a little further about the CTU's role in the project and connectivity in general in the Caribbean region. So I'll hand over to Nigel now. Nigel.
Thank you very much, Tracy. I think I would like to say that a partnership between the CTU, as Rodney has mentioned, we are, our mandate basically is to develop ICT policy and regulation in the Caribbean. And say the Postal Service, there's this legacy PTT type governance in government. So certainly there is a history of a relationship between an organization like the CTU looking at telecom development and the postal service as well. So I think it was quite natural that we eventually got into an MOU arrangement. There was an encounter between CTU and the UPU at the ITU's plenipotentiary conference, and it was subsequent to that the MOU was signed. We realized that there were opportunities for working together. In the Caribbean, in many countries of the Caribbean, we do have some hard to reach areas, some rural areas that the telecoms infrastructure has not really reached out to or managed to get to us yet. And as Kevin mentioned, and as Rodney mentioned, in terms of the Barbados example, the post offices in those rural areas have been quite useful. The general concept of using remote hubs is something that has been applied in multiple countries of the Caribbean. But one big challenge is making them sustainable. Very often, in many cases, they've gone out and created hubs, built a nice new building, and for one reason or the other, the equipment breaks down, they lose the staff, and so on. There isn't another activity associated with it to make the operation sustainable. So in cases where there are post offices close by, maybe, or that could be upgraded, those are some of the examples that we are seeing. Another option that makes itself available to help make it sustainable is that in reaching out to rural areas for improving connectivity and access to services, that this can often fall under the rubric of universal service initiatives. And there is funding available to get those things going and to keep them going. So the partnership with the UPU and postal services generally in the islands is one that we are seeking to leverage better and utilize the available resources as well to make them sustainable. So I'll stop here for now.
Thank you. And just to finish off on the CTU input, is there anything else you would like to add, Rodney? Maybe how the existing projects have gone thus far. I've worked with you, and I recall we've worked with Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and we're about to start working with Belize and Grenada. From your perspective, how have they gone so far in terms of driving this agenda forward?
Well, thank you, Tracy. Well, the assessments that have been done have been very instrumental in informing policy as to what changes needed to be made to ensure that those the postal services in the countries you mentioned are ready. So that work is ongoing. I think you also presented in the CTO ICT Week in St. Kitts and Nevis on the benefits of this initiative, and subsequently Grenada has made a request, and there's a request in the works from St. Kitts and Nevis. So we look forward in helping those member states advance. Since then, we've also assisted the Caribbean Postal Union in the registration of a .post domain for its operations, so that it can benefit from the other service offerings under that .post initiative. We're advocating also for all of our member states to go ahead with the registration of the .post domain for security purposes, for cybersecurity purposes, and also to benefit from the suite of services that are being offered by the UPU. So the work is ongoing. It's not moving as quickly as we would like, but we will continue to push and advocate for resources to be allocated to ensure that the postal services form an integral part of the digital transformation strategy in our member states. Thank you.
Thank you very much, SG Taylor from the CTU, and Nigel as well. I'm now going to hand the mic over to Yuping from the UNDP. So Yuping, another partner of the UPU from the UN, and now from the UN system, the UPU and the UNDP are already collaborating together on several initiatives, including connecting post offices. Now, what do you think will be the benefit of leveraging the postal network to promote digital inclusion and inclusive deployment of digital public infrastructure. Yuping?
Thank you so much, Tracy, and my thanks to you organizers for including UNDP and the UN system in general here. I think Kevin has already spoken to the core fundamentals of why the post really would be an instrumental tool in promoting global digital inclusion, right? The basic concept of connectivity and using the post as a means to have underserved communities and communities that are in remote areas access the internet and have the opportunity to access online e-government services, e-services, basic information. That's at the core of the idea of bringing connectivity and then bridging digital divides. But I actually thought the element that Kevin had highlighted where we need to move beyond just connectivity, right? We need to look at hybrid models of delivery of government services. Is that sort of interesting nuance beyond just connectivity, which is what the UN has been talking about, and digital inclusion, and really looking at this more interesting area where it's not just about giving somebody broadband access or the ability to get online, but what more has to be done in remote places as well. Because as I think has been already said, there are places where it's not that easy to bring in a satellite or fiber link and then say connectivity is going to solve all these issues. And that's how you promote digital inclusion. Like, what more do you have to do to really reach not even just the last mile, but the part beyond in these communities where it's not possible at all? So for me, I think listening to Kevin's presentation just now really illuminates how we have to go so much further than just what is already said at the UN when it comes to bridging digital divides and digital inclusion. And so when I think back to the Global Digital Compact, which was this agreement that was signed at the UN just this September, which is part of the Pact for the Future and promises to be sort of the next iteration of how we look at global digital cooperation, I'm struck by the fact that it doesn't address some of these issues. And that, in fact, if we go back to the origins of the IGF around the WSIS itself, the World Summit for Information Society, and go back to this concept around capacity building and inclusive enabling environments, that really goes to the heart of some of the broader issues and how we should be looking at digital transformation, right? Not just assuming that it's about connectivity or these types of things, but also going beyond to think of more innovative ways to conceptualize digital inclusion and making sure that everybody is not left behind. I'm also actually quite interested, and I will put this out to experts out there, whether, for instance, you would think that what we have right now around, let's say, internet in a box solutions or Raspberry Pi enabled Wi-Fi networks might be another way of actually equipping posts to be part of this important digital transformation. So again, going back to the question of it's not just about broadband connectivity or bringing up fiber connection, are there innovative technical solutions that could also further this effort that we're making to make sure that posts could be the center, the front line of reaching these underserved communities as well? It also would be remiss of me not to just also mention that from UNDP, we've worked with posts as Tracy had mentioned, in a number of areas besides the UPU. So for instance, in Egypt, we've had a long-standing partnership with Egypt Post since 2005 to modernize the digital services and the postal system itself. We actually now have worked with Egypt Post to deliver 27 government services online. There's a lot of budding digital products as well. But now I'm also thinking about whether that partnership could be taken a little bit further, used as a model elsewhere. I know it's been recognized by the UPU as one of these consistent partnerships that's delivered a lot, but really maybe we should think about this in other places as well. So just to end there, and to also see if maybe perhaps any experts could address the question that I raised around new technologies that could potentially be used as part of CONNECT.POST solutions as well.
Thank you very much. And that's a beautiful segue, Yuping, into Mr. Dan York, who is the Senior Advisor at Internet Society. I know Dan for a long time, and Dan is extremely keen on the emerging technologies in this space. He's been involved in community networks and now very keenly involved in the LEO thinking and how that can work in terms of connectivity for underserved regions. So Dan, let me pose this question to you. So given your experience in connecting public buildings and institutions and leveraging them as nodes for community networks, do you think there are any advantages to using these public buildings and institutions as nodes for community networks? Are there any unique opportunities in using post offices? And of course, thread through there the concept of LEO and how that is now shifting, maybe shifting the playing field a bit in this discussion. And linking what Yuping said. Thanks.
So Wait, Tracy, we only have how much for this session?
We have 10 hours.
Okay. You just added me a lot. So maybe let me back up and for folks who aren't aware, the Internet Society is a 30-year-old charitable organization. We've been around and we have a vision that the internet is for everyone. And that's really our focus and our goal. We have about 132,000 individual members. I know Tracy is one of them. And we have 120 plus chapters out there, including you were in Trinidad and Tobago, and that's where we know each other for so many years. We also, I know you were involved with our fellowship program and other pieces like that. And anybody here is welcome to go visit our booth. We have a whole bunch of information there. But to there, we have a strategic goal for 2030 around that people everywhere will have access to affordable, reliable, resilient internet. And this comes to what we're talking about here. I have to say, honestly, and this is why I ask you why you invited me here on one level, is because we have not done work yet with post offices. But it's interesting because when we've dealt with a lot of other different kinds of anchor institutions. And so let me mention a couple of those. We've worked with, to date, around 85 different community networks spread out across the world. We've given over $3 million in grants out to these organizations through the Internet Society Foundation. We're working with UNICEF and the ITU, the Giga Project, looking at how to go and connect schools, partner to connect and some pieces there. We also, we came up last year with a community networks DIY do-it-yourself toolkit. You can find that online and it walks through the steps that are there. And I'll come back to that. Well, maybe I'll go directly to Yuping's question. So often, one of the challenges, and you said it when you said about LEOs, low Earth orbit satellites, we jump to the technology, but Nigel's point is really the key one. We can go and drop in a technical solution that is great. It would be awesome connectivity. We can do that, and then it'll be dead because either the people have left or the subscriptions run out or whatever else. So really, the biggest part is how do you have a sustainable, community network? How do you have something there that has an econ that works and that also has this? In reality, I think this is where anchor institutions up with that because of the fact that they do provide sometimes a stronger anchor in that kind of space. Again, we haven't worked with post offices, but we have a large in Armenia right now. We're currently in a program where we're digitizing rural libraries, and we've worked with libraries. And part of what's interesting is as they start to develop it for patrons, for people who are there and coming in there, people start to come in, they get their Wi-Fi, they get their access there. Then it starts to become more of a digital community center. People come in there and they're having meetings, they're going in there to study, they're doing stuff like that. And so it becomes this kind of home. Similarly, in Paraguay, we were working with a hospital that went and was adding connectivity and doing that. In Winnipeg, up in Canada, we were doing a project that was going and taking a community center and giving it that connectivity. It became a social hub. It really brought people in a way that was different. In Rwanda, we did a school, actually our chapter there helped build a building that would be able to go and help this school provide a computer lab and connectivity and pieces. What they found, though, of course, was that then other people started to show up in Wi-Fi, and they were able to go and work with that. All of these, I think, are great examples of the kind of would also be would be part of that. One key factor, if you look at them all, is maybe we should swap mics because this one's fading in and out. So one key thing is that what we've seen in many of these places is these anchor institutions in some way have a sense of resilience that is stronger than other locations. In some cases, it may be that they're economically sustainable, that they're perhaps funded by the government, that they have some other elements around that. Often they're housed in a place that has additional electrical resilience, might have generators, might have solar panels, might have something like that. Another just basic factor is that people know where it is. They know where the post office is. They know where the hospital is. They know where that is. So it's a beacon where people can come there and be engaged with a digital life in some kind of way. So to all of those, I think those are reasons why we found that public institutions in particular are great places to begin as a node or to be part of it. They may not even be the center, but they may be part of that and providing that connectivity because people know where it is, they can get there. It's maybe even a more rugged building in some form, and they can do that. So that's kind of where we see all of that going in there. And I think we'd be delighted to talk to folks in post offices and other areas as well. As far as the technology, Tracy had mentioned, we did do a project a couple of years ago, and we're still monitoring all these low Earth orbit satellites, things like Starlink, OneWeb, pieces like that. I could go on for hours. So, you'd have to scope that to what you want me to say. But I would just say to you that they are another connectivity solution, right? They're great to give connectivity to especially rural and remote regions, places that you can't get to by other mechanisms. And they can provide high speed, low latency connectivity. Still not as good as what you could get with like a direct fiber connection. But if you can't get that, then they provide another alternative that's there. We had a session earlier today talking about the policy and other issues around that. And there's a bunch of them and some things, but they're another tool in the toolbox that we have these days that are out there. And I'm glad to go into detail if you want on particular questions around that. And thanks for having me here.
Thank you very much, Dan. And we really appreciate you being here. I know you were concerned about why we're inviting Dan to this session. I think you're seeing the benefit of it now. So that's exciting. And maybe the post offices can become a new thrust in the Internet Society world. Why not? We're happy to work with you. We're here at the UPU. Give us a call. We're right here. So we've said a few things about.
Should I write you a letter? Sorry, I had to do it, Tracy.
Yeah, no choice. Yes, postcard probably. So we've talked a bit about connectivity. We've talked, about how to get to the last mile, different types of technology. We haven't talked yet about securing that connectivity, ensuring that not just the physical layer is secure, but also transactions and how we communicate with stakeholders in both directions. It doesn't make sense to just connect people, and there's a risk in that connectivity. And how do we really treat with that? I have another colleague who I know quite well, which sounds like a lot of people I know very well in this open forum. Ms. Carrie-Ann Barrett. She is also from the Caribbean, surprise, surprise, from Jamaica, but now she's based at the Organization of American States. And she is the chief of the cybersecurity division there. So Carrie-Ann, I have a question for you. Maybe this is something that you can help us with. What are the cybersecurity implications of connecting postal infrastructure, and how can countries best equip themselves to be more cyber resilient? Would you consider posts to be critical infrastructure for that matter? Over to you.
Thanks for that, and thanks to all the speakers who went before me. Thanks to the UPU for inviting OAS. It's a critical discussion that's happening, and I think similar to the Internet Society, we haven't had the opportunity to work with UPUS closely. But I think through this session, we recognize that there's a link that we can't ignore, and we will be working together going forward. I think the discussion so far have really laid the platform that as the postal system shifts towards automation and digitizing, doing all the e-commerce integrations, digital mail tracking, electronic payments, all these things to make more efficiency, unfortunately, it usually means more vulnerability with this connection. It doesn't mean that we should fear it or that the postal system should be worried in as much as to identify the risk and prepare itself for it, as the question is about. Many of the countries are investing in smart postal infrastructure. And in doing that and those connectivity, it just means that there are now more entry points for cyber attacks. If you think about what you are in the question to critical infrastructure, the more connected postal systems get, you're now handling more sensitive data, including personal identifiable details. You now have more financial information. And if compromised, it would lead to identity theft, financial loss. And in some rural areas where you are improving their connectivity and accessibility for the citizens, you're also recognizing that the rural areas may not have the required staffing that's needed on the technical side to do what's required. So if you compare the postal system to other high-profile examples, such as transportation, or healthcare, I would probably say that the postal system in identifying whether or not it's a critical infrastructure needs to start looking at one, the type of information and data and the criticality if it is that the systems are stopped. In preparing for this, there was some thought about who's impacted if the postal system goes down, and how does that actually affect society if the postal system goes down. And if you think about criticality, it's as the postal system offers more and more services to people and citizens, especially in the rural areas, which we've spoken about so much in this session so far, you'd have to think the impact and the ability to be able to bounce back from such an attack and the agility that's needed for that. Who'll be targeted if you think about it? A lot of the times we have the systems, and that's one thing, but we also have to think about the postal workers, recognizing that they are a key component to that value chain for offering the services. And oftentimes, if it is that you are doing more connectivity, it means that your postal workers as well would need to be focused on as a key entry point for cyber attacks. Phishing campaigns aimed at postal workers and customers could lead to unauthorized access to these data. How is this unique also to some of our countries that are similar to Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of them now being connected and some of the challenges? In looking at the solutions, Tracy, I'd probably say that we also have to take into account who we're dealing with. As the postal systems across the globe start to connect and you compare it to some regions like Latin America and the Caribbean, there's going to be varied levels of cybersecurity maturity. I've heard some of the examples already in this conversation in some more advanced countries, but we also have to take into account some of our countries who, one, already struggle with internet connectivity like our Pacific Islands, or some of our smaller Caribbean countries who may have emerging economies, but lack the financial resources to put the cybersecurity infrastructure or talent to be able to secure the postal systems adequately. And then we also have to look at the more broad challenges of corporation, which oftentimes cybersecurity requires. So to your last aspect of the question you asked me, and just reflecting what are some of the solutions, because it's not a doomsday solution. I think the postal system has been robust for so many years and carried us through so many things. I think this other element of connectivity is just yet another challenge for them to overcome. And collaboration is going to be key, working with government to ensure that the postal operators have connections with cybersecurity firms, that they understand the international landscape with other international organizations. We already have the UN as a part of this discussion. Also, looking at how they would manage third-party risk. A lot of the postal workers and the postal systems work with other third-party vendors to be able to do their work. How you actually look at the reliability with the logistics for them and the technology that they're employing to make sure that they are protected. And the last two critical things I would probably say is thinking about strategies, such as establishing, for those who may not know, an incident response team, which is really your firefighters when a cybersecurity incident happens, just to make sure that we start thinking about establishing those for the postal systems. The financial sector is a good example where they prioritize incident response teams and they have cross-network collaboration among themselves. And I think the postal system can start to think about it that way, so they have shared resources. And the final recommendation I'd probably make to make yourselves more cyber resilient is cyber education. Our workers, as I pointed out, are critical entry points to the systems. They have the passwords, they log into the computers daily. How do we ensure that they recognize what is a phishing attempt and how they handle data more broadly? And I'll probably stop there, so at least we could continue the discussions. And I hope that some of these thoughts would be talked about throughout our session. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you very much, Carrie-Ann from the OAS. I'm seeing a lot of comments coming in from Rodney in the chat, giving some information, some links. And just putting back to Carrie-Ann's point about cyber resilience and the second to last point you made about CSIRTs. I'm going to make a plug here for what we are doing at the UPU. We're establishing an Information Sharing and Analysis Center, an ISAC, which will be global, for the postal sector that's currently underway. We're in the last stages of our design, and we expect to have that up and running, if all goes well, next year in 2025. In addition to that, we're also implementing Secure.Post platform, which would allow the postal, as you said, the postal employees, their stakeholders, to get, I would call, user-friendly access to information, education, training, awareness, resources generally about cybersecurity and how to become more cyber resilient. So I think from where we sit, we are trying to do the very best in ensuring that the sector becomes more resilient. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, of course, the fact that we also run the .post top-level domain, which we'd like to think is one of the most secure, if not the most secure, top-level domain on the internet, and encourage all stakeholders who are interested in this sector to look into what that brings to the table, as well as the services we offer with that. So while I have just given a plug for ourselves, I'm going to pause now to an open forum and ask the audience if there are any questions, any thoughts. I'm seeing 2 hands already going up, so I would maybe pass the mic. Is there the third mic? The third mic, mic number 3. Yes. And I saw gentleman in the red jacket first. Introduce yourself and let us know who you are.
Okay, hello, my name is Nicolas Fiumarelli, and you mentioned a lot about connectivity and inclusivity. For me, the postal services is a new topic. You also address about cybersecurity, but we are talking here about digital transformation as well. So I'd like to touch on the role of emerging technologies in the postal services, right? For example, in the UK, in the USA, they are using drones for postal deliveries in remote areas. In the US, is leveraging AI to optimize delivery routes. And countries like Rwanda, for example, have demonstrated drone efficiency in logistics. This technology not only improve accessibility, but also help reduce emissions, right? And enhance sustainability. So how can postal services in the Caribbean, right, adopt similar innovations to address infrastructure challenges while aligning to environmental sustainability goals? Thank you.
Thank you. And the way I like to do things is not to do immediate answers. I'm going to ask Kevin, the UPU expert in the postal sector at our table today, to think about that for a second and to come with an answer. There's another question in the crowd, and I have my lovely Internet Society colleague, Alejandra, helping me here. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm from the Internet Society Foundation. I just had a question. You mentioned that a lot of these post offices are rural, and Kevin mentioned the emerging e-government services. So my question is, are there any plans, or does this program include any kind of digital literacy training for people? I know that we currently have a chapter that's doing training in rural areas so that people are able to use e-government services, but also thinking of it from in terms of cybersecurity or cyber literacy, cybersecurity literacy.
Thank you. And Nigel, did you have a question? I saw your hand go up.
Yes, my hand did go up, but I think the question I had has come up. So
excellent. Third question.
Okay.
Introduce yourself and yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Siletsa Tsilehoa from Lesotho. I'm the president of Internet Society Lesotho. And I'm working as the system librarian. So I'm wondering if this concept we can go into the digitization of the library and bringing the library to the people, not people come to the library. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So I think all 3 questions seem like they can start with a response from the UP, but I'll also ask other colleagues to be able to give some responses. No, but let's start with our expert from the UPU, Kevin.
So thank you very much for the question about drones. I think, yes, 100%. I think with drones especially, it's a very particular case because I think this also democratizes delivery to rural areas. Why am I saying that? Is because when you've seen pilots for drone delivery, they've tended to be concentrated in rural areas because this is something that's very hard to make work even in urban areas. So I think it's actually one of the rare emerging technologies that works better in rural areas than it does in urban areas for delivery. So I think there's a lot to explore there. And also at the UPU, we've recently did a survey where we've asked all the, over 150 postal operators about their use of emerging technologies. And drones were one of them, but we asked about very wide variety. There are even some using things like exoskeletons and other really out there emerging technology. So there is actually a lot of use of emerging technologies by postal operators, but I haven't done the analysis yet, so I can't tell you which ones are the most used yet or not, but that will be coming out in the near future. And then there were two questions that kind of were about digital literacy programs. So the reason why I came back to this slide is because this is the kind of thing that happens in this setup. So it all depends. Everything is context specific. So in some countries, you'll have postal operators who will set up this kind of community center inside the post office, and that's what you see here. And the post operator will offer digital training to its citizens. But in other places that might not work. And in other places, I think you made a great plug when you were speaking about libraries. So actually, Maria was here earlier from the IFLA, so the International Federation of Library and Associations. And we're actually at the moment trying to formulate a MOU to kind of determine whether there are any potential or there is any potential to create ecosystems of digital inclusion where maybe citizens go to the post office for one type of service and then maybe they go to the library for another type of service. Because although in this example, in this context, this works very well, in other contexts, the post office might not be set up to offer the digital literacy training. It might be, we might be better off having the like e-government services and these kind of transactional services happening in the post office, and then maybe some more of the digital literacy type programs that you were explaining happen in the library. But the thing that we find is that this sometimes happens, but it happens informally. And we're trying to find to see if there is any potential to formalize these kind of relationships between post offices and libraries so that, people can be sent from one to the other and quite seamlessly instead of, an ad hoc fashion. Thank you. And I know you've done a lot of work with libraries. I don't know if you want to pick up.
Well, yeah, I mean, it actually kind of speaks to the more that, we talked about the sustainability of community networks, and part of it is the financial aspect, right? And that was the part I focused on in my earlier remarks. But you really have a much broader sense, which is that they need to be human sustainable as well. That digital skills training, that digital literacy, that ability to know and do that is so critical, because otherwise you don't have a system that's long-term sustainable. One of the things we found is that this community-centered model that we're talking about here and that we've been working on really is the way to deploy this, because it's bottom up, it's coming out of the community. And this is where I would say, as you look at your systems, what we found works is that when it's really of the community and by the community, then the people are bought into it and working with it. It's not imposed by some central entity. It says, wire up every, put this in every post office, something. But it's more of, the communities that are around that are wanting to build that connectivity. They're using the post office or other entity as that hub, and they're working with it in that way. But we found that when communities do that and build that, they develop the expertise, they develop the ability to create this. And that means that they're much more invested in it. They also have that human resilience, the capacity to understand what it is, how it works. They're able to ensure that it keeps on working, through in the Caribbean, the next hurricane or whatever, the recovery time, the ability to do that. So that digital skills and building that human capacity is vital to have sustainable, community-centered connectivity in so many different ways.
Thank you very much. Before you pick, I think you have some responses, but let me see if any of our colleagues online have a response. I see Carrie Ann, her hand is physically up, Carrie Ann, yes.
Yeah, I think the questions are really good, and I think what's important as we even look at the efficiency, anything that is an IoT, whether it be a drone or any other smart postal infrastructure that's implemented, I think the last speaker in terms of highlighting the need to have the digital skills is critical. It's just always to keep in mind that the more connected that they get, it's another surface or another attack point in which a cyber criminal can enter. And even as we improve efficiency, I think it has to be coupled automatically with the necessary cybersecurity, at a minimum awareness training for the users that are being given these tools to make it more efficient. The idea of digitizing and improving or closing the digital divide for many persons and making these services more accessible, it's also informing the users of these services, recognizing that if they are more sensitive to some of the risks that could happen, they would be able to partner with their service providers in rural areas, et cetera, to be able to keep their data more secure and their information more secure. So I just wanted to highlight that it's one of those things that has to be a coupled approach, making sure that you kind of think about all the risk factors at the same time and ensure that not just standards are implemented, but that persons have the ability to implement the standards.
Thank you very much, Carrie. And just to remind everyone, Carrie Ann is Chief of Cybersecurity at the OAS. I forgot to introduce who I am. I'm Tracy Hackshaw. I'm with the UPU. I am the head of the .POST team, along with my colleague on my right, Mesa Sabra. And we work at the Postal Technology Center, and I see my boss is online. So that's what reminded me that I have to say who I am. Did he still there? I don't know. So let me just say who I am, just for the record. So we have about 5 minutes left. So let me do this. I'm going to ask SG Taylor to respond if he has any response and to give a closing comment, then come back to Yuping, same thing, respond and a closing comment. And I see Nigel, who may want to give a response to the closing comment, and then perhaps if there's time, Dan and Kevin. So let's go to SG Taylor first, and then response and closing comment. And we have less than 5 minutes left.
Thank you. I like the question on the drones and so on, and it further highlights the need to partner with the Postal Service that understands, in particular, rural communities in developing countries. Some of these communities are unplanned settlements, so there isn't a very neat addressing system. Very often, the postman or post person is the trusted person in the community, understands where people live and so on. So even for delivery of by drones, this is something that may be best done through the postal network. If we're talking about rural communities and unplanned settlements, the skills issue is a very big one as well, where those persons who are unskilled from a digital perspective are able to receive that hand-holding for the application of online services at the Postal Service. And this is something that's being done in Barbados, for example, with the application for the US visa, which is 100% online. It cannot be done in person. So I want to, again, thank the Tracy and UPU for the partnerships that we have established and for the work that is being done to bridge the divide between postal services and digital transformation strategies. And we think this is a winning strategy that will help us to ensure that persons are not left behind, in particular rural and underserved communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, SG Taylor, and thank you as well for sparing your time. It's early morning, I know, in the Caribbean, and for you to bless us with your presence. And of course, thanks to Nigel, who will give us comments in a bit from the CTU. I'll hand over to the UPU. Sorry, the sign threw me off. To Yuping Chen from the UNDP for her final comments and a response if she needed.
Just very quickly, I think I just really want to pick up on this point on skills and capacity building. That's what we have as the #1 priority from the program countries that UNDP works with. And it's particularly important for least developed countries and underserved communities as well. So again, as we talk about all these global solutions, connectivity, and so on, as a lot of other colleagues have said, it's really the ability to use these in a sustainable fashion. And that really starts with building that digital capacity right there. So just to reiterate around, it was a really great conversation. I'd like to pick this up with a lot of colleagues around the table. And thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yuping. So there seems to be time for Nigel and Dan to give a few comments, and maybe a last word from Kevin. So Nigel?
Yes, very quickly. Thanks as well from me to UPU for the opportunity. At the point I wanted to make, we haven't had time to discuss it here, was what about financial services? Because I mean, I certainly recall a thing called a postal order. So the post offices were part of the financial system, and What about the technology associated with financial services or fintech thing? Is that part of the developments going forward as well? Thanks.
And I see like great minds thinking like Rodney just raised that in the chat, exactly the same point. Yep. So that we're glad Kevin to answer that question, but maybe Dan, last thoughts, last comments, and then we let Kevin wrap it up.
I'll just say thank you, Tracy, for putting this, and Kevin for putting this whole panel together. And this was a very interesting conversation. I look forward to further conversations around this. And I think I've said plenty before, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, Nigel. Yes, digital financial services are definitely a part of it. I didn't really have time to delve into it. I have a longer presentation which speaks about the types of services that we target, and they tend to be e-government services, digital financial services, and e-commerce. But actually, any digital service that can be offered through the postal infrastructure, I believe, would be more inclusive due to what I was saying earlier about their presence in rural areas. But yes, I think you hit the nail on the head. And it's digital financial services are offered by many posts. I'm analyzing data right now that shows think about almost 60% of postal operators deliver some type of digital financial service. So it's something that we want to build on and help even more postal operators deliver. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Carrie Ann, any last thoughts?
I think the only thing I would probably emphasize is for persons to recognize that digital resilience has to be coupled with cybersecurity. And I think those would be my last words.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank all of our participants and those who've joined us in the room today for a wonderful open forum. We cracked it in the nick of time. So thank you to Kevin, to Dan, to Yuping, to Nigel, to Rodney, to Carrie Ann, and Mesam in the room, and everybody online, and everybody in the room. Thank you so much for your participation and engagement. Please contact us at upu.post and trust.post more information, and of course at connect.post for the project title that we talked about today. It's pretty obvious, right? Connect.post. Thank you very much, and see you somewhere else somewhere soon. Kevin, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, connect.post is also our URL. So you can just type that in your browser and you will find us.
And